Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a blue-white control deck that's trying to get to the late game thanks to a bunch of counterspells and removal spells. So let's get started here with our 2-drops, where we have Knight of the White Orchid, double white for a 2/2 first striker, so a good early blocker against aggressive decks. But the ability here is pretty relevant, since when the knight enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you do, you get to search your library for a plains card and put it onto the battlefield untapped and then shuffle your library. So this is very useful against all the ramp decks that are running land destruction, since this allows you to catch back up on the land count. Also just very good on the draw, since on turn 3 you can just play out the knight before playing your land, get a free land and then still play your land for the turn, and you'll have ramped for free basically. So pretty versatile and powerful card, so happy to have both copies. Moving on, we have a Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Doesn't need a lot of explanation, just a very powerful card that gives us some card selection, and when he transforms into the Planeswalker, gets a lot of card advantage from the -3, and the +1 also very good against creature decks. And you could also ultimate him to try and mill someone out once in a while. We have one copy of Reprisal to deal with large creatures. Can't kill an Ulamog, but we have a lot of other ways to deal with Ulamog in the deck, and just 2 mana instant is quite powerful. Also against decks that try and put a lot of enchantments on one creature, this is a cheap and easy way to deal with those creatures. Then another reason to play the blue-white control deck is that we get to play with Celestial Flare, which is now a lot better than it used to be, since for double white, target player sacrifices an attacking or blocking creature, so this becomes very powerful if an opponent is only attacking with one creature, because then that opponent has to sacrifice the only attacking creature. So this can deal with cards that are otherwise pretty problematic, like Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, or even a Gaia's Revenge, which otherwise can't be targeted by removal spells. So Celestial Flare goes around that and gets rid of those indestructible and untargetable creatures, as well as just being a pretty good card all around in a blue-white control deck that wants to keep up its mana, since this is an instant. We also have a Telling Time, just for some card selection that we can play at the end of turn if we don't have anything else to do. Just to dig a little deeper, look for more lands if we need those, or for some action if we need that instead. One copy of Disperse, just a versatile answer that can bounce an enchantment, a creature or a planeswalker for a turn, and buy us some time. 2 copies of Scatter to the Winds, just a 3 mana hard counter is good enough. The Awaken is a nice touch, but we probably won't be using it a whole lot. Just happy to have a 3 mana hard counter. Then we also have Spell Shrivel, which is not a hard counter, since the opponent can pay 4 mana to let the spell resolve, but still a pretty decent card in the early game. Can counter critical turn 4 plays from the opponent, even if we're on the draw. And the exile part here can also be relevant if an opponent is running cards like Green Warden of Murasa, which could get back cards from the graveyard. But otherwise we're not really using the exile pile, since we're not using any processor cards in this deck. Next up we have a Solemn Offering, which may seem like a weird inclusion since it's such a narrow card, only dealing with artifacts or enchantments, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of decks nowadays are running artifacts or enchantments. Against the Sphinx's Tutelage deck you want to be able to kill the enchantment, against the green ramp decks you want to kill From Beyond, or even a Suppression Bonds if they're splashing white. And even against the red aggro decks you can even kill an enchantment and gain 4 life, which is pretty relevant. So we could also be playing the 2 mana creature that destroys enchantments, but I like the Solemn Offering because gaining life in a control deck is pretty sweet, and we can also flash it back with a card like Jace that can flash back instants and sorceries from our graveyard. And if we don't need it, we can also just loot it away with Jace. Of course we only have 1 Jace, so it's only a small thing, but I still like the 4 life we gain. Then we also have 2 copies of a Roil Spout, which is a pretty nice removal spell. Doesn't permanently deal with the creature, just puts it on top, but that means that you're at least even on card advantage, and then if you get to Awaken it for 6, you even get a 4/4 creature out of the deal, which can start attacking, and you can start applying some pressure to try and close out the game. We also have Archangel of Tithes, which is a pretty sweet creature, 3/5 flyer for 4 mana with an ability that makes the opponent pay mana whenever they want to block or attack when the Archangel is involved. So just a sweet creature that we get to play with, since we have lots of white mana that can support the Archangel. 1 copy of Suppression Bonds, just to deal with planeswalkers mainly, can also just be used on creatures of course. And every once in a while you can put it on an evolutionary leap to try and stop the activation there. Then 2 copies of Inspiration to draw 2 cards at instant speed. So if the opponent doesn't want to play into our counterspells, we can just Inspiration end of turn. 1 copy of a Gideon, which is another very powerful win condition. Can make allies every turn, become a 5/5 and deal even more damage, or every once in a while in this deck you'll also -4 to give all creatures +1/+1, even though we don't have a ton of creatures in the deck, so probably won't be used as often as in other decks. Then we also have Disciple of the Ring, which is another powerful finisher in a control deck, since we get to make use of all those instants and sorceries we have in our graveyard. So this is another reason why a Solemn Offering is a little better than the 2 mana creature. So for 1 and exiling an instant or sorcery from our graveyard, we get to do a bunch of things, including countering non-creature spells unless the opponent pays 2, give the Disciple +1/+1, tapping a creature or untapping a creature. So pretty versatile and pretty powerful once you land the Disciple with a bunch of mana up, since then you can protect the Disciple with the first ability here if the opponent tries to kill it with a non-creature spell. Then we also have 2 copies of Planar Outburst, which is our sweeper in the deck to deal with all those creatures that the opponent might have played. And we also get to Awaken it for 8 mana to also have a 4/4 creature out of the deal. And the fact that it destroys all non-land creatures means that it plays pretty nicely with our other Awaken cards, like Scatter to the Winds or a Roil Spout that we have in the deck. So we can keep attacking with those land creatures. Then 2 copies of Angelic Edict, which is another nice answer to Ulamog, since we get to exile it, and also another answer to enchantments that might come up, like Sphinx's Tutelage, which we already mentioned. 1 copy of Drowner of Hope as one of our finishers. 1 copy of Oblivion Sower, which can ramp us into even more lands. Then 1 copy of Alhammarret, which is also pretty nice against the ramp decks, since it can prevent an Ulamog from being cast in the first place. And then we also have Ulamog ourselves, just as another finisher that can also deal with problematic permanents with the cast ability here. And then our mana base, 9 plains, 8 islands, 2 Prairie Stream, 2 Glacial Fortress, and in this deck I like 4 copies of Azorius Guildgate, since we have a lot of double or even triple white cards and a lot of double blue cards as well. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener here, which looks acceptable. We've got a Guildgate turn 1, turn 2 Island, turn 3 Glacial Fortress, so it comes into play untapped. And we have turn 2 and 3 plays, so not in a bad spot here. Of course, it depends what our opponent is up to. Alright, Celestial Flare is nice to have access to as well in case our opponent starts attacking with creatures. So here, end of turn telling time, and then next turn we can leave up Spell Shrivel most likely. So no play from the opponent. And here I don't mind a Scatter, and I guess we take an Inspiration here, since we already have a Spell Shrivel. So we do need to draw into some lands at some point, but with 2 counterspells, I think we're at least not going to lose if we miss 1 or 2 land drops here. So 3rd land, no play from the opponent, looks to be mono blue, so could have the Sphinx's Tutelage as a win condition. Alright, so here I'm just gonna pass the turn. We still have 7 cards in hand, so don't need to discard quite yet. And then leave up our counterspells if the opponent doesn't do anything. End of turn telling time again. Hope to find some lands. So still no play from the opponent, it looks like. So we're gonna telling time, and their opponent counters it. So hopefully there's a land on top here. There is not. Alright, then we'll have to pass the turn again. Still keeping up our counterspells. So nothing too bad can happen. And still no play. Okay. Well, another Celestial Flare is not really what we wanted here. So here I'm probably gonna discard the Celestial Flare. Opponent has an Inspiration. So actually here I think we can Spell Shrivel this. Since even if our opponent does resolve a Sphinx's Tutelage, we have an answer in Solemn Offering. And we also have a Dispersed, which can bounce the Tutelage. Alright, there it is. So our opponent could very well have a counterspell to protect the Tutelage from the Offering. So we might want to use the Disperse here instead. We drew the Knight, which is nice. Could get our Prairie stream, but that will come into play tapped since we only have the 1 island in play at the moment. So I think we just play the Knight here, hope our opponent doesn't counter this, and then just get the plains. So now we can Disperse end of turn. If the opponent counters that, then we can follow up with the Solemn Offering. If the opponent doesn't counter the Disperse, then we can counter the Tutelage on the way back with the Scatter. So at least that's the plan here. Coastal Discovery. Opponent is tapping out for it, so in response I'm going to Disperse the Tutelage. We could also just let this happen and then make sure to kill the Tutelage with the Solemn Offering, which also isn't bad. But I think not getting milled for a bunch is worth it here, since we still have the Scatter to the Winds, which can counter the Tutelage, and Celestial Flare can answer the 4/4. So not too worried here. So let's hit for 2, since we're not gonna block the 4/4 anyways. And the plan here is to scatter the Tutelage if our opponent plays it. They probably answer with another counterspell, which is fine, because then they're tapped out and we can Solemn Offering on our turn. And we also get to Celestial Flare this turn, which is nice. Opponent attacks first, and I'm still gonna Celestial Flare here. See if they have a counter for this. They do. So we could just Celestial Flare again. This will entice our opponent into tapping out for the Tutelage, and then we can Solemn Offering it. Instead they go for... alright, weird. So they have a Disperse in hand. And do they tap out for Tutelage? They do. Alright. So now I think we just go for the Solemn Offering. We could also Oblivion Sower here, which is not bad, since even against the Disperse, Oblivion Sower is pretty powerful. And then next turn we can Solemn Offering plus have Scatter to the Winds up to protect the Solemn Offering. It's only bad if our opponent has 2 counterspells in hand, but doesn't seem super likely. And they also have to answer the Oblivion Sower and the Knight that's in play. So I actually don't hate just casting the Oblivion Sower here. We got 1 land, which isn't bad. We get to hit for 2. So now the opponent has to deal with what's in play. And if they tap out, then we can get the tutelage, which seems to be our opponent's main win condition here. Still have a decent amount of cards left in library. So if they play another big draw spell here, then the Solemn Offering can get the job done. So Disperse on the Sower is fine, since we will just get to hopefully find more lands. So here let's attack first. So now if we try to play the Sower, our opponent likely has a counterspell for it. So we could also just pass the turn here, but that seems bad when our opponent has a tutelage in play. So I think I just force the issue here on the Solemn Offering instead. So we can Solemn Offering and then use the Scatter to counter our opponent's counterspell, since they can only play 1 counterspell at the moment. Unless I guess they have a Dispel, which seems unlikely. Alright, they don't have a Dispel, so Solemn Offering does get the job done. Opponent has another Disperse, which seems pretty aggressive here on a 2-2. And no other plays. So let's see, our opponent has 7 lands in play, we have 8, so we won't get a land from the Knight. If we play Sower, we have 2 mana up, so doesn't really play around an opponent having a Spell Shrivel here. So I think we just play the Knight and then Inspiration end of turn. Maybe try and play around a Spell Shrivel at the moment. And this way our opponent doesn't get to spend their mana efficiently while we still have an Inspiration end of turn. Talent of the Telepath is fine. Opponent does not find anything relevant. Anchor to the Ether on our Knight, so here we can choose to Inspiration. Well, I guess we Inspiration here, just in case we draw a 2 mana instant, like Telling Time that we want to play. We don't. Knight goes on top. And now we find 2 nice win conditions here, which hopefully are enough to win the game. So let's see, we have 9 mana available. This basically costs 4 if you use the Cyan tokens for mana, so we can't quite cast both Sower and Drowner of Hope. Unless of course we get super lucky on the Sower, but that's unlikely. So I think we just play out the... It's close. I think we play the Drowner, since even if the Sower gets countered we still get some value, but we won't get any value if the Drowner gets countered. And might as well also play the Knight here for some more pressure, since we don't really have to play around a Sweeper from Mono Blue. So we can pass a turn. We have a Suppression Bonds for a tutelage, which will only stop the activated ability, unfortunately. Won't stop the other text. But at least it's something, and if our opponent plays a creature themselves, we can tap it down with the Drowner's ability, or we can Suppression Bonds it. Alright, Void Mage. Not the greatest card against a Drowner of Hope. In fact, our opponent bounces a Cyan token, which I should have sacrificed in response to tap down the Void Mage. that was a small misstep. But here I'm just going to attack with our 5/5 and our 2/2. 7 damage, so 2 turn clock. Opponent takes it. And I don't think I can get punished too hard for playing the Oblivion Sower here. We can even pay for the Spell Shrivel. Get 2 more lands. And we'll pass the turn here. Another Void Mage. And this time we're gonna remember to use this. Well, never mind. I wanted to use the Drowner of Hope's ability, but I clicked on the Sign token instead. So did not get to tap down the Void Mage, otherwise we could have used the Suppression Bonds. I guess we can still use the Suppression Bonds here. And attack with everyone, and the opponent is dead unless they have an instant they can play here. And here play the Suppression Bonds over the Angelic Edict, since Edict can actually exile another tutelage. Alright, looks like we got the job done, despite the 2 small missteps with the Sign tokens. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. Okay, let's take a look here at a mulligan. And this hand is not great. Don't have double whites, no early plays if we don't draw another white card, so I think we go down to 6, and this is a lot better. So now we have Telling Time plus Reprisal. If we find blue we can scatter, and Angelic Edict down the line. So Evolving Wilds turn 1, grabbing a Plains. Here we're just gonna play out our Plains and hope to find some lands with this Telling Time. It's gonna be pretty upsetting if we don't find lands, since then we're stuck drawing a non-land on our turn as well. Just another Evolving Wilds from our opponent. Getting a forest, so let's Telling Time. Alright, so there's a Prairie stream at least. And I think we can get the inspiration here over the second Edict. So now we get to play Prairie Stream. Unfortunately it does come into play tapped, but we can just Telling Time end of turn again. It's pretty unlikely that we get to use the Reprisal here. Alright, our opponent on a retreat to Kazandu, which is not the end of the world, since we're not really going to be attacking in the early game. I don't hate Spell Shrivel, but we also need the lands here. So let's grab an island and a Spell Shrivel. So now we get to play island, pass a turn with Inspiration and our 2 counterspells up. And see what our opponent is up to. Could be some sort of Abzan enchantments deck. Alright, there's a Shambling Vents, which hopefully we draw into a Celestial Flare to deal with that. That's Inspiration end of turn. 2 lands. Don't really want to Edict the retreat to Kazandu, since if our opponent is playing Abzan enchantments, we want to save this for more problematic enchantments or creatures. We could see our opponent just activating the vents and attacking, which if we had Celestial Flare would be a pretty big blowout, but we do not. So up to a 3/4, if our opponent puts another counter on this we can Reprisal it, but right now we're taking 3 damage. Still don't really want to tap out to Edict the retreat though. Alright, there's Celestial Flare right on time. So now we get to pass with Flare, Reprisal, 2 counterspells up. So should have all our bases covered. And is the opponent gonna go for the same play? They are. So here I think we want to... it's interesting. Do we Celestial Flare or do we Reprisal? If your opponent is playing Abzan enchantments, they might have a token theme, which makes Celestial Flare a lot worse. Yeah, I think I Celestial Flare here. Reprisal can still take care of a big green creature that they're likely to have. Alright, so we're just gonna say go a bunch. Hoping that we get to use Spell Shrivel before our opponent gets too many lands in play. Read the Bones. Yeah, let's Spell Shrivel that. Don't want our opponent drawing too many cards. Alright, Drowner right on time. So we get to play Drowner and still keep up Scatter to the Winds thanks to our Scion tokens. So now we have some pressure. Let's scatter the Edict here. Try and get some damage in with our Drowner. It's tempting to Edict the retreat here, since your opponent can gain a bunch of life of it. But I think we have to stay strong and keep it for a creature. Wouldn't mind drawing into our Ulamog at this point. Another Read the Bones is fine, I guess. Opponent probably looking for lands. And they find one. But no play. So let's hit for 6. And hope to draw some non-land cards. Gate Creeper Vine is totally fine. So let's see if our opponent gains 2 more life here. They are. And Acid Moss is also fine. So probably not gonna win the game just with the Drowner, but Ulamog should be pretty good here. So I think I attack for 5. And then Ulamog probably gonna take care of 2 lands here, since I don't want our opponent casting something big. And we still have the Edict for the retreat. So let's see, they have black-white, green-white, black-green. I think the white mana is a thing we wanna try and stop. I think we go for the Orchid of Guildgate. And I guess the... well, they have a lot of white, so maybe we just cut off the black and get the Woodland Cemetery. Alright, there we go. Hope I clicked correctly. We did. Alright, so hopefully our opponent doesn't have a second Edict to deal with the Ulamog here. They do. That's unfortunate. Still get to hit for 5. But now our opponent may be able to come back, since they do have a lot more cards than we do. So attack for 5. Now it's pretty tempting to Angelic Edict the retreat, since we don't want our opponent gaining too much more life. We have Spell Shrivel for whatever our opponent plays next, and Reprisal to deal with the creature now, so I think going for the Edict now is fine. Spell Shrivel now also a lot better, now that our opponent lost 2 lands. They cast Oblivion Sower, which is tempting to Spell Shrivel here. I think we do Spell Shrivel it over casting Reprisal. I know our opponent still gets the trigger and gets to find some lands here, which means our Spell Shrivel will get a lot worse if our opponent finds a bunch of lands. Opponent exiled Gideon, Scatter and Offering. Alright, let's hit for 5 again. So at this point, hoping to draw into Alhammarret, I guess. Still keeping up a Reprisal. So if our opponent plays another big dumb creature, we can deal with it. Opponent does indeed play another big dumb creature. And another retreat. So we can Reprisal end of turn. Attack for 5. Put our opponent at 1. Still more lands here. Might as well play it in case we draw into card draw spells and want to play the cards we draw into. Maybe we had a window where we should have edicted the enchantment a turn earlier, because now our opponent casting Nissa's Renewal, they're gonna gain 7 plus 6 life. So Drowner is definitely not gonna get there on his own. And if our opponent has their own Ulamog, we're also in trouble. Still more lands. Opponent down to 9. But now if they have Ulamog, it's pretty much game over unless we top deck an answer. Instead it's Obnixilis, which is also a problem for this deck, since Planeswalkers in general are pretty difficult to deal with. Retreat to Hagra, but no land. Alright, Solemn Offering. I guess we do go for the retreat to Kazandu here. Could wait for the retreat to Emeria if our opponent has that. But at this point we're gonna have to kill our opponent with damage, since Ulamog is exiled. So probably trying to fly over with an Alhammarret or casting our Oblivion Sower. So preventing the most life gain from the retreat seems like the play. Nissa is gonna generate some value. So we're falling further and further behind here, after having our opponent at 1. Third retreat. It's gonna gain 2 life. And drain us for 1 as well. So yeah, with Obnixilis at 3 now, that can destroy our Alhammarret even if we top deck it. I don't see us winning this game anymore. Opponent had the timely Angelic Edict for Ulamog, and that was pretty much game. Can play a knight here, but it's not really going to matter. Not sure why our opponent made a 4/4 token. So, drawing a bunch of cards, And now it's just a matter of time before our opponent finds one of their big finishers and we are dead. Too bad we don't have a card like Sphinx's Revelation. That would really help. But I guess we won't be seeing that card for a while. So we'll take 4. And another Woodland Wanderer. I guess we can always draw into our Sweeper, make a 4/4 token and kill the Obnixilis. That actually wouldn't have been bad. So I guess we'll have to settle for Oblivion Sower instead, hope to exile our opponent's win conditions. We found a Gideon, so an eye for an eye here. Pause the turn. Opponent down to 18 cards in deck, so I guess that's our main win condition now. Obnixilis killing Oblivion Sower and their opponent playing Divine Bloodlord. Alright, I guess it's gonna be decent with the 2 enchantments in play, but not a great card. Pretty expensive for what it does. But at this point, any finisher is gonna be good enough. So another land. Drains us a bunch. And then attacks us for 9. So we have to chump the 4/4 here, otherwise we're dead. Reef Soul, alright, GG's. We kind of had to raise there at the start. Drew Ulamog, but our opponent had the answer. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is pretty reactive and pretty slow. I think we can do better. Alright, don't hate the look of this hand. We have Celestial Flare for the early game, which looks like it's gonna be pretty important. Then Offering for a possible enchantment. Still pretty slow and only 1 Celestial Flare, so hopefully our opponent enchants the Vanguard with a bunch of cards. Instead plays a Perilous Mirror. So now if we try to Celestial Flare, our opponent will sacrifice the Mirror and we'll take 4 total. So I guess we can also just Solemn Offering the Mirror. Which probably means I will just play the Guildgate here over keeping up the Celestial Flare, since next turn we'll Offering the Mirror. Alright, opponent has a Stalwart Aven, Renown. Go down to 15. Then we'll basically gain 2 since the Mirror is gonna deal 2 to us. So back up to 17. Alright, Angel's not a bad draw either. So now we have the option of playing Angel next turn. Or we could keep up Celestial Flare and Inspiration. Alright, our opponent is enchanting, but the problem is that our opponent has 2 creatures in play. So Celestial Flare can only kill 1 of them. So I think playing the Angel is probably gonna be better. Our opponent probably has a Roil Spout to put the Angel back on top. Gideon is also an interesting twist, but with a flyer in play, Gideon is a lot less appealing. So I think I want to play out the Angel. And then maybe play Gideon. So does our opponent have a Roil Spout or another removal spell for the Angel? If they don't, then the Angel does a pretty good job of blocking. Attack with both, pay 2 mana. So I'll just block the Vanguard, take 2. Alright, and no 4th land for the opponent, so I don't hate our spot now. So I think we just play the Gideon and make a token. Could also again leave up Celestial Flare and Inspiration, make our opponent sacrifice one of the creatures and block the other one. But getting some pressure in play also seems good. So now we can make a token and then block the flyer, block the ground creature. And still force our opponent to pay 2, since we're gonna keep the Angel on defense here. So if they don't answer the Angel, they'll have a hard time getting rid of Gideon. Bottle Gnomes, alright, that's a new one. Maybe against the mono red decks. Perilous Mirror and Bottle Gnomes are both pretty good against mono red. But now we get to turn the corner. So we could plus Gideon. Get in there, our opponent likely blocks and sacrifices the gnomes. Yeah, still seems fine. Still gonna keep the Angel on defense to protect Gideon, and we can also play Disciple plus keep up 1 mana to counter a non-creature spell or tap a creature down. Opponent just took it. Alright. So no need to activate the Disciple if our opponent attacks with all 3. But if they play a removal spell, we may want to use it. No plays. Alright. Let's get in there with Gideon again. And I think we still stay back with our Disciple. We're in a winning position. We can fuel our graveyard with Inspiration if we need to. We're hitting all our land drops, we have Ulamog in hand, so really don't need to do anything too crazy. Opponent has a Tinkerer, which is fine. No attacks. So let's Inspiration first, and then maybe tap down something end of turn. Yeah, no, let's just untap and attack with a Gideon once again. Could also ultimate, which wouldn't be terrible on this board state. Let's see, we have 7, 8. So we could ultimate, play Knight, keep up a bunch of Celestial Flares. Definitely like playing the Knight here. Nah, plusing Gideon still seems better. Could get aggressive with the Disciple, but there's no real reason to. Opponent takes it again. And staying back with the Angel when our opponent is low on lands seems pretty good. So now, let's see, we have 2. Asper Zoa is fine. Does our opponent attack? We could just cast the Celestial Flare just to get an additional card in our graveyard. And opponent can still gain 3 life. I think we can do one more attack with the Gideon and then we might go for an Alpha Strike. Next turn we could also maybe cast Ulamog, which will finish the game on the spot. So let's see, we have 2 Celestial Flares, so we could tap 4 things down with the Disciple, attack with everyone. Opponent can still gain 3, go up to 11. I don't think we get to kill our opponent yet, so let's play it patient. Attack for 5. Opponent will also have to return the Bottle Gnomes or the Asperzoa next turn. And they're gonna go for the Asperzoa. Replay Asperzoa. And now let's see. So we can play the 2 flares, tap down everything, our opponent gains 3. Yeah, sure, let's go for it. Kind of a waste here, but if our opponent has... Actually, let's tap down the other one first. If our opponent has an interactive spell for 2 mana, that would be pretty bad for us. So we can play Ulamog, exile 2 lands, and then just attack with everyone. Our opponent can't pay for the Angel and dies. At least that's the plan. I guess they can, yeah, they can't block, so activate Gideon and attack with everyone. Alright, sweet. This game went according to plan. So I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day.